Did you know that your brain has to work significantly harder to tell a lie than it does to tell the truth? When you tell the truth, it's a simple act of recall. But when you lie, your brain lights up like a pinball machine. The frontal lobe has to go into overdrive to suppress the truth, while other parts scramble to invent a plausible alternative, manage the emotional fallout of the deception, and simultaneously monitor the reaction of the person you're lying to. It's an exhausting, taxing, and deeply unnatural process. For years, people have been obsessed with the idea of lie detection, spotting the twitch, the averted glance, the sweaty palm. And while those things can be indicators, they are merely tremors on the surface. They don't tell you anything about the tectonic plates of motivation grinding away deep beneath. Today, we're not going to talk about tells. We're going to talk about the truth of why people lie. Because if you only learn to spot a liar, you've gained a party trick. But if you learn to understand the motivation behind the lie, you've gained a profound insight into the human condition itself. You've moved from being a spectator to being a student of human nature. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Frank. Frank was a mid-level accountant at a respectable firm, a guy you wouldn't look at twice. He was accused of embezzling nearly $250,000 over 3 years. When we brought him in, he was a textbook case. He avoided eye contact, he gave rambling, non-committal answers, he fidgeted. Anyone with a weekend seminar on body language would have pegged him as guilty in the first 5 minutes. And he was. But the why was the real story. The other detectives were pushing him, throwing evidence in his face, trying to force a confession. But that just made him retreat further into his shell. I took a different approach. I noticed his wallet was worn, and peeking out was a frayed photo of a young girl in a wheelchair. So I stopped talking about the money. I started asking about his family, his daughter. Turns out, she had a rare degenerative disease, and the experimental treatments weren't covered by his insurance. The money wasn't for a lavish lifestyle, it was for a long-shot chance to save his daughter's life. He wasn't a master criminal, he was a terrified father who saw no other way out. The moment he confessed, it wasn't with the defiance of a crook, but with the heartbreaking relief of a man finally able to put down an impossible burden. We didn't just find the money, we found the man. Do you see the difference? The first approach catches a thief. The second understands a human being's desperation. This isn't just about high-stakes interrogations. Think about the small, everyday deceptions. Your friend who cancels dinner plans at the last minute claiming they have a headache. The surface-level read is that they're flaky. But what's the hidden game? Maybe they're struggling with social anxiety and the thought of a crowded restaurant became overwhelming. Maybe they lay in a financial bind and were too embarrassed to admit they couldn't afford to go out. The lie, "I have a headache," isn't the point. It's a piece of misdirection, a shield to protect a deeper vulnerability. The real story is the fear or shame hiding behind it. When you start looking for the motivation instead of just judging the lie, your perspective on everyone around you begins to shift. So, here are a couple of questions I want you to sit with. Have you ever told a lie, even a small one, and felt your heart race or your mind go blank for a second? That physical reaction is your brain protesting the cognitive dissonance, the stress of holding two contradictory ideas in your head at once, the truth and the fiction you're trying to sell. And more importantly, what was the real reason you didn't just tell the truth in that moment? Was it fear of punishment? Fear of disappointing someone? Fear of looking foolish? Be honest with yourself. Understanding your own motivations for deception is the first and most critical step to understanding it in others. Because behind every lie is a story, and inside every story is a fundamental human need trying to be met. Our job is to learn how to read that story. When you understand the motivation, the next layer is to appreciate the sheer mechanical effort involved in telling a lie. It's not a moral failure as much as it is a neurological and biological event. Your body is fundamentally hardwired for efficiency, and the truth is efficient. A lie is the opposite. It's a drain on your resources. We call this cognitive load. Think of your brain as the central processing unit of a computer. Recalling a true memory is like opening a single small file. It's quick, effortless. Now imagine you have to lie. Suddenly, your processor isn't just opening one file. It's actively running multiple complex programs at the same time. Program 1 is suppressing the truth. Program 2 is constructing the new false narrative. Program 3 is performance, delivering that narrative in a believable way. And Program 4 is running constant diagnostics, monitoring your target's reactions for signs of disbelief and adjusting your own performance in real time. Is it any wonder, then, that the system starts to lag, that you see glitches in the performance? I remember a suspect in a complex fraud case, a man named Marcus. He was brilliant. His story was an intricate tapestry of half-truths and fabrications, and for 2 days, he didn't waver. He'd rehearsed it. He was disciplined. But we weren't trying to punch holes in his story, we were just making him tell it, over and over, but never in the same way. We'd ask him to start from the end and go backward. We'd ask him to focus on the sensory details of a specific Tuesday afternoon from his story. What did the coffee taste like? What was the weather doing? These are things your brain automatically encodes in a real memory, but they are enormous drains to invent and keep consistent on the fly. By the 3rd day, Marcus was physically spent. It wasn't the pressure of the interrogation room, it was the cognitive load. His answers started getting shorter. The vibrant details faded. He'd pause for a fraction of a second too long before answering a simple question. It was the micro-lag of a processor about to crash. We weren't looking for a bead of sweat, we were watching for the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes only from the immense effort of sustaining a lie under scrutiny. He eventually confessed, not because we found a flaw in his logic, but because he was simply too tired to keep running the programs. You felt this in your own life, I guarantee it. Think about a time you had to invent a detailed excuse for something. Why you were late for an important dinner, for example. In the moment you construct it. You say you were stuck in traffic caused by an accident on the bridge. You might even add details about seeing the emergency lights. Now imagine a week later someone asks you, "Hey, what kind of car was in that accident you saw last week?" What happens? Panic. A brief, cold flash of it. Your brain has to scramble. Did I say it was a car? Was it a truck? What bridge was it again? You have to rebuild the lie from scratch. But if you had actually been stuck in traffic behind an accident, you'd recall the details effortlessly. Oh yeah, it was a blue sedan, looked pretty bad. The memory is just there. The lie has to be constantly maintained and reconstructed. It's fragile. So let me ask you, have you ever felt so stressed trying to keep a story straight that you just wanted to give up and come clean, simply for the relief it would bring? Have you noticed how your own body protests when you're being less than honest? That tension in your shoulders, the dryness in your mouth. That isn't just guilt. That's your physiology screaming about the inefficient and stressful process you're forcing it to endure. Scientifically, it's a beautiful and brutal process. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain right behind your forehead that handles decision-making and reasoning, is the part that has to actively suppress the truth. It's literally putting a muzzle on the more primitive, honest parts of your brain. Meanwhile, your limbic system, your emotional core, freaks out. It recognizes the social risk and the internal conflict, and it floods your body with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. This is what causes the so-called Pinocchio effect. It's not your nose growing, but it's just as real. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing becomes shallow. Blood is diverted from your extremities to your major muscle groups in a classic fight-or-flight response. Researchers have even shown with thermal imaging that anxiety can cause a drop in temperature at the tip of the nose as blood flow is redirected. These aren't tricks to be spotted. They are the echoes of a profound internal war between the part of the brain that wants to tell the truth and the part that is forcing the lie. When you see them, don't just think liar. Think, this person is in conflict. So, we've established that lying is biologically expensive. It puts the brain and body under immense strain. The logical question then becomes, why would anyone pay that price? The answer is that the perceived rewards, or the feared consequences of the truth, are so powerful that they override the natural impulse for honesty. In all my years, I've found that almost every deception, from the trivial to the monumental, is powered by one of 4 core psychological drivers. Understand these, and you'll understand the engine behind the act. The first, and most primal, is self-preservation. This is the lie born of fear. Fear of punishment, fear of shame, fear of being diminished in the eyes of others. It's about protecting the self at all costs. I once had a case, a brutal robbery homicide, where our only witness was a young man who swore he was home all night. His alibi was shaky, but he clung to it. He was terrified, but not of the killer. He was terrified because at the time of the murder, he was a block away buying illegal prescription drugs. His lie, which nearly derailed the entire investigation, wasn't to protect a murderer, it was to protect himself from a minor possession charge. His fear of that small immediate consequence was so great that it blinded him to the larger moral imperative. In everyday life, this is the lie you tell when you call in sick to work because you were unprepared for a big meeting. The lie isn't, "I am ill." The truth is, "I am afraid of failing." The second driver is social harmony. These are often called white lies, but their function is crucial. They are the social lubricant that allows society to function without constant, brutal honesty. These are lies born not of fear, but of a desire to protect the feelings of others and maintain relationships. I consulted on a tragic family dispute once. An elderly woman had received a terminal diagnosis, but told her children that the treatments were working and her prognosis was good. She wasn't trying to be malicious. In her mind, she was being kind, sparing them the pain of her impending death. But her lie, intended to preserve harmony, ended up creating chaos and deep resentment when the truth inevitably came out. They weren't angry that she was dying, they were heartbroken that she didn't trust them enough to share the burden. This is the same driver at play when you tell your friend their awful new haircut looks fantastic. The lie is not about the haircut. It's a statement that says, "Our friendship is more important to me than my opinion on your hair." The third driver is the one most people think of, personal gain. This is the calculated, strategic lie. It's deception as a tool to acquire something: money, power, status, and advantage. These lies are not about avoiding pain, but about seeking pleasure or reward. I worked on a long-term case involving a charismatic financial advisor who had fabricated his entire history: his Ivy League degree, his Wall Street credentials, his past successes. He built a kingdom on a foundation of lies, not out of fear or kindness, but because it was the most direct path to the wealth and admiration he craved. He wasn't just telling lies, he was living one. This is the driver behind the person who wildly embellishes their resume to get a job, or the salesperson who conveniently omits a product's flaws to close a deal. It's a simple, if cynical, cost-benefit analysis. Finally, and perhaps the most complex driver, is fantasy and ego boosting. These are the lies people tell to make their reality more palatable. Often the first person they are trying to convince is themselves. The motivation is to bridge the gap between the person they are and the person they wish they were. I met a man once, a veteran, who told the most incredible stories of heroism in combat. He'd captivate entire rooms. The only problem was, he'd spent his entire service as a supply clerk in a non-combat zone. He wasn't lying for money or to avoid trouble. He was lying to create an identity he could be proud of, to quiet a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy. The modern equivalent is all over social media, the curated feeds that present a life of perfect vacations, perfect relationships, and effortless success. It's a form of deception aimed at building a more impressive version of the self. both for others and for oneself. So look at the deceptions you encounter, big and small. Which of these reasons feels most familiar to you as a motivation for your own past untruths? When you've seen others lie, can you now look past the deception itself and see which of these drivers was at play? These drivers are deeply rooted in our fundamental human needs: the need for safety, self-preservation, the need for belonging, social harmony, the need for esteem, personal gain, and even a distorted need for self-actualization, fantasy. The lie is just the strategy, often a flawed one, for meeting the need. Now we arrive at one of the most pervasive and dangerous myths in this entire field: the idea of a universal body language. People love this fiction. They buy books with checklists. If he touches his nose, he's lying. If she crosses her arms, she's closed off. It's comforting because it's simple. It's also profoundly wrong, and relying on it will lead you to misjudge honest people and be fooled by skilled manipulators who know how to perform the right signals. Truth isn't a multiple-choice test where you can just memorize the answers. The single most important factor in interpreting nonverbal communication is not the signal itself, but the cultural and situational context in which it occurs. Ignoring that is like trying to translate a language using a dictionary that's missing half its pages. I once consulted for an American tech company that was on the verge of a massive merger with a Japanese firm. The deal was worth billions. The final negotiations were happening in Tokyo. The American CEO, a classic backslapping, look-you-in-the-eye type, came back convinced the Japanese CEO was being deceptive. He wouldn't meet my gaze, he told me. He was quiet, evasive. I got a bad feeling. He's hiding something. The deal was scuttled. The American CEO trusted his gut, his lie detection skills. What he failed to understand was that in that specific cultural context, his aggressive, sustained eye contact was seen as intimidating and disrespectful. The Japanese CEO was averting his gaze not out of deceit, but out of politeness and deference. His periods of silence were not evasion, they were signs of deep, respectful consideration of the offer on the table. The American CEO wasn't reading deception, he was reading a different cultural language and completely misinterpreting it. A billion-dollar opportunity vanished, not because of a lie, but because of ignorance. This plays out in less dramatic ways every single day. In the United States, a firm handshake is often seen as a sign of confidence and honesty. In many parts of the Middle East, a gentler, softer handshake is the norm, and a bone-crushing American-style grip can be seen as aggressive. In some Balkan cultures, nodding your head up and down means no, while shaking it side to side means yes. Imagine trying to conduct an interview under those conditions, armed only with a generic list of tells. You'd be hopelessly lost. Even something as simple as personal space is culturally defined. What feels like a normal conversational distance in Latin America might feel like a hostile invasion of personal space to someone from Northern Europe. Is the person being aggressive, or are they just standing where it's normal for them to stand? Without understanding their baseline, their nonverbal cues are meaningless noise. So I'll ask you to think about your own experiences. Have you ever traveled to another country, or even another part of your own country, and felt like you completely misread a social situation? Where the rhythm of conversation felt off, or people's reactions weren't what you expected? Now, flip that around. How might your own cultural background, the unwritten rules you were taught about eye contact, gestures, and emotional expression, be shaping how you interpret the honesty of the people you meet every day? Are you judging them by your rulebook or theirs? The science behind this is fascinating. Psychologists talk about cultural display rules. These are the unconscious social agreements we learn as children about which emotions are acceptable to show and how to show them. While the core human emotions, joy, sadness, anger, fear, are largely universal, the display rules are not. In some cultures, it's considered appropriate to express grief loudly and publicly. In others, the expectation is stoic restraint. Neither reaction is more or less authentic. They are simply different learned performances of the same underlying emotion. So when you're looking for a non-verbal cue, you're not seeing a direct pipeline to a person's soul. You are seeing a complex interaction between their genuine emotion and a lifetime of cultural conditioning. The real skill is not memorizing gestures, but in developing a curiosity about where the other person is coming from and what is normal for them. Context is everything. Without it, you're just guessing. For all the attention people pay to body language, they so often miss the most fertile ground for truth, the words themselves. A person can rehearse a smile, they can practice keeping their hands still, but it is incredibly difficult to consciously manipulate every facet of language, word choice, sentence structure, tense, and tone in real time while under pressure. The mouth is a far more leaky vessel for the truth than the body. You just have to learn how to listen, not just to the story being told, but to the language being used to build it. I recall an assault case where the primary suspect was a man who, on the surface, was a pillar of the community. His alibi was ironclad, rehearsed, and delivered with a calm, steady demeanor. He made perfect eye contact. He didn't fidget. By any classic body language metric, he was telling the truth, but his words betrayed him. During a 3-hour interview, he never once used the victim's name. It was always that woman, her or she. When talking about the location of the attack, a park near his home, it was that place, never the park. Most tellingly, when he described driving home that night, he said he put the vehicle in the garage. Not my car or my truck, the vehicle. This is called linguistic distancing. It's a subconscious effort to create a psychological buffer between the speaker and an event they find traumatic or incriminating. He was verbally pushing the reality of his actions away from himself. We didn't confront him with this. Instead, we started using his language back at him, asking questions like, "Tell me more about what that woman was like. And what did you do with the vehicle after you parked it?" The subtle shift, the mirroring of his own distancing language, unsettled him. It signaled that we were listening on a different level, and it was that crack in his composure that we were eventually able to work open. You can see this everywhere once you start listening for it, especially in the world of public relations and politics. Think about the classic non-apology. Someone in a position of power says, "I'm sorry if my words offended anyone." Listen to what that sentence is actually doing. It doesn't apologize for the words. It shifts the focus to the reaction of the offended. The implicit meaning is, the problem isn't what I said, it's that you were too sensitive to handle it. Contrast that with the simple, powerful, and rare phrase, "I'm sorry for what I said. It was wrong." Another classic is the passive voice. Mistakes were made. Who made them? Who made? The sentence structure conveniently omits the actor. It's a linguistic fog designed to obscure responsibility. "I made a mistake" is a statement of truth and accountability. "Mistakes were made" is an act of evasion. This practice is a simplified version of what investigators call statement analysis. We look at the structure of a person's account. A truthful statement recalled from memory is typically linear and often filled with small, irrelevant sensory details. "I got in my car, and it was so hot I had to roll down the windows, and I remember a song by the Eagles was on the radio. Then I drove to the store." A fabricated account, because it's being built from logic rather than memory, often lacks these organic details. It's too perfect, too logical. They might also use what we call bridging phrases to skip over the part they have to invent, like, "I left the house, and the next thing I knew, I was at the store." What happened in between? The brain of a liar will often skip the parts it hasn't constructed yet. So, here are your questions. Have you ever listened to someone tell a story and felt that how they said it was more important, more revealing than what they said? Pay attention to your own language for a day. When do you use vague or distancing words? When do you use the passive voice? Often you will find you're doing it in situations where you feel uncomfortable or wish to avoid direct responsibility. This all ties back to that concept of cognitive load. Your brain is a storyteller, but it's an efficient one. When it's telling a true story from memory, the language flows with a certain rhythm. When it's building a lie, the cognitive strain shows up in the speech. You get more pauses, more ums and ahs as the brain scrambles to invent the next detail. The vocal pitch can rise and fall unnaturally as the stress of the lie affects the tension in the vocal cords. The sentence structure can become overly simplistic or bizarrely convoluted. You are literally hearing someone's brain work too hard. Words are not just containers for meaning, they are artifacts of the mental process that created them. They are fingerprints. Just as a lie is shaped by its motivation, it is also shaped by the personality of the person telling it. Deception is not a one-size-fits-all behavior. It is an intensely personal performance, and the style of that performance is dictated by the actor's core nature. If you try to apply the same template of tells to a shy, reserved introvert and a charismatic, outgoing extrovert, you will fail because they do not lie in the same language. The key is not to look for lying behavior, but to understand a person's baseline personality and then look for deviations that are an exaggeration of that very personality under stress. I worked a corporate espionage case once where we narrowed the leak down to 2 employees in the same department. One was an introverted data analyst, let's call him David. The other was a classic extroverted account manager, Michael. When we interviewed David, his deception was a retreat. He spoke less. He made less eye contact than usual. He answered in monosyllables. His lie was a fortress of silence, an act of omission. He simply withheld what he knew. Michael was the polar opposite. His deception was an advance. He became more charming, more talkative. He built an elaborate, detailed, and completely fabricated alibi, volunteering information we hadn't even asked for. His lie was a smokescreen of charisma, an act of commission. Both were lying about the same event, but their methods were a distorted reflection of their fundamental personalities. The introvert retreated further into himself, the extrovert projected further outward. If you were only looking for the classic nervous fidgeting, you might have cleared Michael and suspected David, when in fact, they were both guilty. You see this in everyday life. Think of a shy coworker who knows a project is behind schedule but is too conflict-averse to tell the boss. Their lie is silence. They simply don't bring it up, hoping no one will ask. Now think of a smooth salesperson trying to close a quarterly goal. They might actively invent features a product doesn't have or create a false sense of urgency. One lie is passive concealment, the other is active fabrication. The personality of the liar dictates the strategy of the lie. This brings us to a more clinical and critical distinction, the role of empathy. For most people, there is an internal emotional friction to lying. We are social creatures, and deception risks social cohesion. This triggers a stress response rooted in empathy, the fear of being caught, of damaging trust, of hurting someone else. This is the activity in the limbic system we discussed. However, in a small subset of the population, those with strong psychopathic or sociopathic traits, this empathetic machinery is wired differently. For them, lying doesn't produce the same internal conflict. It doesn't trigger the same physiological alarm bells. A lie is simply a tool, devoid of emotional weight, to be used as needed to achieve a goal. This is not a judgment, it's a neurological observation. They are not necessarily better liars from a technical standpoint, but they are performing without the internal static of guilt or fear that creates the very cues most people look for. So, take a moment for self-reflection. Do you consider yourself more of an introvert or an extrovert? Are you more driven by a need for harmony or a need for achievement? How do you think your own personality affects the way you handle uncomfortable truths? Do you retreat into silence, or do you talk your way around things? Knowing your own style is the first step to recognizing these patterns in others. From a psychological perspective, this aligns with frameworks like the Big Five personality traits. A person who is naturally high in agreeableness, for instance, might be more prone to telling those social harmony lies to avoid conflict. Someone who is low in conscientiousness might lie out of convenience to avoid an obligation without much forethought. The most crucial element is that a person's personality gives you their baseline. The deception is the spike on the graph, the deviation from that normal behavior. So stop looking for generic tells. Start paying attention to people. Learn their individual rhythms and styles. The lie won't be a behavior you've never seen before, it will be their normal behavior, but amplified and distorted by the pressure of the untruth. Everything we've discussed so far, the neuroscience, the motivations, the verbal and nonverbal cues, is simply diagnostic. It's information. But information without the right strategy is useless, and this is where most people get it wrong. They take this knowledge and they go on a hunt trying to catch people in lies. This adversarial mindset is the single greatest barrier to discovering the truth. The goal is not to become a human lie detector. The goal is to become a truth seeker. A lie detector is looking for a confrontation. A truth seeker is trying to create a connection. One posture creates resistance, the other invites honesty. Let me tell you about a kid we brought in on a burglary charge. He was 19, and he was lying badly. His story was a mess of contradictions, and my partner was ready to tear it apart and force a confession. I asked for a moment alone with him. I sat down, pushed the case file aside, and said, "Look, son, it's pretty clear you're in a world of trouble and you're scared. I get that. And when people are scared, sometimes the first story they tell isn't the truest one. Sometimes they tell the story they think they have to tell. So let's do this. Let's put that first story on a shelf for a minute. We'll just leave it there, and you and I can just talk about what's really going on." I gave him an honorable exit. I didn't call him a liar. I called him scared. I gave him a rationale for his lie that preserved his dignity. By giving him that out, I made the truth the path of least resistance. He didn't have to fight me anymore. He could finally put the burden down. He confessed to everything. Not because I caught him, but because I created a space where he felt safe enough to stop running. This principle applies everywhere. Think about a parent and a child. The parent walks into the living room and sees a priceless vase shattered on the floor. The accusatory, lie-catching approach is to march up to the child and demand, "Did you break this? You have just created a trap." The child's brain instantly calculates the odds. Telling the truth guarantees punishment, while lying offers a chance of escape. You have incentivized the lie. The truth-seeking approach is different. The parent kneels down and says, "Wow, I see the vase is broken. I'm so sad. That was my favorite. Tell me what happened." You have stated the fact, shared your own emotion, and then invited a narrative. You have separated the event from the immediate judgment, creating a small pocket of safety for the truth to emerge. This works in the office with an employee who missed a deadline, and it works in a relationship when you feel something is wrong. Don't ask questions that trap, create openings that invite. So, here's where it turns back on you. Think of a time you were afraid to tell the truth. What would have made it easier for you? Was it the fear of the other person's anger, disappointment, judgment? Now, look at your own life. In your relationships with your partner, your children, your colleagues, are you creating spaces where people feel safe enough to be honest with you? Or is your reaction to uncomfortable truths so severe that you are unknowingly training the people around you to lie to you? There's a simple brain science to this. When a person feels accused or threatened, their amygdala, the brain's alarm system, lights up. This triggers a cascade of defensive neurochemicals. It effectively hijacks the prefrontal cortex, the center of rational thought, problem-solving, and yes, honest disclosure. You cannot get the truth from a person whose brain is in lockdown. Your job as a truth seeker is to bypass the alarm system. You do this through rapport, through non-judgmental curiosity, through signaling that you are an ally in solving a problem, not an executioner looking to assign blame. When you create psychological safety, the amygdala calms down. The prefrontal cortex comes back online, and the truth becomes a viable, rational option instead of a terrifying threat. So stop trying to hunt for lies. Start cultivating an environment where the truth feels welcome. You'll be amazed at what you discover. So, where does this all leave us? We've journeyed deep beneath the surface, past the simplistic party tricks of spotting a twitchy eye or a sweaty palm. We've seen that a lie is not a simple act of falsehood, but a complex event involving neurology, psychology, personality, and culture. The ultimate takeaway is this: the obsession with lie detection comes from a place of fear, the fear of being fooled, of being taken advantage of. But all it does is make you suspicious, constantly scanning others for signs of betrayal. It puts you on the defensive. The approach we've discussed today, the path of the truth seeker, comes from a place of curiosity and strength. It empowers you to see the world and the people in it with more clarity, more compassion, and ultimately, more effectiveness. You stop being a passive victim of deception and become an active participant in the discovery of truth. For years, I had an estranged relationship with a close family member. Our connection had been broken by what I, in my old mindset, saw as a pattern of lies and broken promises. I had a file in my head, full of evidence of his untrustworthiness. My training had made me an expert at cataloging his deceptions, at seeing the tells, at proving my case to myself. And it left me completely alone with my righteousness. It wasn't until much later, after I'd begun to shift my own focus from the lie to the motivation, that I could look at our history differently. I realized his lies were never about me. They were shields. He was deeply ashamed of his professional and personal failures, and his fabricated stories were desperate, clumsy attempts to build a version of himself he thought I could respect. He wasn't lying to hurt me, he was lying to hide his own pain. Armed with that new perspective, I reached out. I didn't confront him with his lies. I didn't demand an apology. I just said, "It sounds like you were going through hell back then. I'm sorry I didn't see it." That single sentence, born of understanding his motive rather than judging his actions, opened a door that had been sealed for a decade. We didn't just reconcile, we built something truer than we'd ever had before. That is the transformative power of this approach. It moves you from a position of conflict to one of connection. It allows you to see the struggling human being behind the clumsy defense mechanism of a lie. So, I'm going to ask you to try an experiment. In the comments below, don't share a story about a time you triumphantly caught someone in a lie. Instead, I want you to share a story about a time you finally understood the reason behind a lie, from a partner, a child, a friend, and how that understanding changed everything. Let's use this space to build a collection of insights, not just a list of accusations. As you go forward from here, I want you to ask yourself these final questions. What is the biggest thing you've learned about yourself during this discussion? And how will you approach your next difficult conversation, not as a detective, but as a truth seeker? The difference is subtle, but it is everything. When you stop hunting for lies in others, you create the space to find the truth in yourself. And that is the only foundation worth building on.